Well, hello. Thank you, America's Hero Group, for having me on today. I was told I can come on and share a little bit about myself. I am an Air Force veteran. I'm also a former journalist. I'm also an author. So, this is actually my book called No Longer Silent. I'm also a member of the Pink Berets who help sexual assault survivors. And so, I'm just really honored to be able to be on today to share a little bit about myself and hopefully gain some followers. If not, be able to assist and I'll explain the different ways that I'll be able to assist in just a bit. So let me start off with a little bit of my background. As I mentioned before, I am an Air Force veteran. So I actually was living in Japan and going to school and interning as a news reporter at a local TV station. And I loved it so much that I said, I'm going to try to join the military and see if I can do this as a job for the military. Now, granted, everyone says, why didn't you join the Marine Corps? We're not going to go into that, but let's just say my dad was a Marine and that was good enough for me. So I said, let me check and see what other branches offer a broadcast journalism type career field. And I found out that the Air Force did. So I applied and I basically got the job, got sent to Lackland Air Force Base. Then I went to Fort Meade where I did my tech school at DINFOS, Defense Information School. And then I got sent right back to Japan, except this time I wasn't at Iwakuni, I was at Yokota. And absolutely love Yokota, love Japan in general, learned the language. During the time that I was there, I was a radio show host. So I had over 75,000 listeners on Eagle 810, and I was DJ Fructis. And during that time, I also anchored the evening newscast, which was the Pacific Report. When I wasn't doing those things, I was going to school full time, volunteering around the community, and I was doing a lot of like acting gigs. So I was in a couple movies there. I was in different magazines, and mostly what was most important to me was being involved in the community. So I got to host different events, come and be a panelist on different events for high school students, which is something I still continue to do now, help high school students. But I did that during my career in the Air Force, at least while I was in Japan. Once I was done in Japan, I got sent stateside. I finished up my active duty contract at Joint Base Andrews, during which time I got to see the Obamas all the time. I did the POTUS missions, so I got to escort the media off and on base so they can get footage of the Obamas taking off and landing. And during that time, I like to joke and tell people I carried DVDs in my car, like the old rappers. Back in the day, the old rappers would have cassette tapes in their trunks and they would hand them out to people, hoping that they would get their big gig from it. Well, that was me with demo reels on DVDs. So every time I escorted the media, I would give them my demo reel and my resume and say, hey, would you mentor me? I want to be a news correspondent. And so basically, because of that and all the networking I was doing, as soon as I got out of the military, I got hired at Network News. So I worked for the network a few months, and then I left and got my master's at Syracuse University in broadcast and digital journalism. As soon as I got my master's, they hired me right back. So I became a regional correspondent. I covered the Southeast region. So I covered the Carolinas, Georgia, Tennessee, pretty much any state that they needed me to go to in that area. That's where I got sent to cover different stories. So I covered I was on the campaign trail covering political figures. I covered natural disasters. I covered military affairs. So it was a wide range of different things that I got to cover. I also got to cover a lot of court cases, Dylan Roof, Bo Bergdahl, Reality Winner. If you remember those two last cases, those were military involved cases. So I got to cover a lot of national court cases as well. And so basically after that, I went to local news in Florida. I did that for a bit, and then I came to DC and I became my company's first Pentagon correspondent. I did that for about 2 years. And then once my contract had ended there, I said, you know what, the pandemic has been insane. I need to take a step back and recalibrate what my priorities are. Because during that time, I'd lost a lot of loved ones. And that just made me realize how important family was. And so basically, since that time, I've been spending my time building my relationships with my family members, getting more involved in the community. So I mentor high school students 2 months out of the year. Every Saturday, I mentor them in journalism and how to be great, fair and balanced journalists once they get into college and beyond. I also work with TAPS. So I mentor 7 to 9-year-olds who've lost their loved ones either while deployed or to suicide. I also involved in the community as far as raising money for homeless veteran women and their children. I also feed the homeless sometimes as well. So that's been some of the great things that I've been able to do. But I think most importantly was being able to publish my book, which is called No Longer Silent. And it's actually my memoir of overcoming trauma as a child, as well as while I served in the military. So just to give you all a little brief synopsis of my book, basically it talks about childhood traumas as far as being assaulted. I was sexually assaulted as a child for 2 years. And I also dealt with gun violence. So I was shot, different things of that nature. Once I grew up, I joined the military, and then I was assaulted in the military. And so my book basically goes into those traumas that I had experienced and how I was able to overcome those traumas and what I'm doing now to help others, which is the perfect peg into how I got involved with Pink Berets. So I was going and promoting my book and doing different book signing events, and I got involved with a few veteran organizations. And my whole thought process, or the whole point of me getting involved with them, is because I wanted to see what I could do to help other sexual assault survivors, not just adults, but also children. So my focus is service members, veterans, and children who have had to deal with sexual assault, domestic violence, or gun violence. And so when I was at one of the meetings, a woman had suggested to me, hey, you should reach out to the Pink Berets. I'd never heard of them before. So I said, okay, tell me a little bit about them. And she did. And so, of course, as soon as I get home, I'm like trying to Google them. And for whatever reason, I kept spelling beret wrong. So I never found them. So I'm like, okay, well, it wasn't meant to be. Well, I want to say about a month later, I was on Instagram and I started seeing posts from the Pink Berets. And I'm like, okay, this is nothing but God. So I reached out. That's when I got to speak to Stephanie. And it's just been a beautiful relationship ever since then. So I'm so thankful to be able to be involved with them and help out in any way that I can. Most recently, I actually was able to attend a gala that they had in Bernie. Let me make sure I'm saying it right, Bernie, Texas. And that was to raise awareness about what their mission is, which is to help sexual assault survivors, active duty, and veterans. And I got to meet a lot of phenomenal people. And I emphasize people, not women, people, because there was also a lot of great gentlemen there too who believe the same things that we do. Like, sexual assault doesn't just happen to women. It happens to men as well. It happens to children. It happens to the elderly. And so it was just really beautiful to be able to be there and be around a bunch of people who were pouring love into me. And I got to pour a little bit of love into them. And we got to know each other, and that camaraderie. I think that was the biggest thing, the camaraderie that we all knew we served, and we all came together for another purpose now. This is our new mission, which is to help sexual assault survivors. So that's how I got involved in the Pink Berets. And if you guys haven't heard of them, you definitely should check them out. It's an amazing organization. Like I said, everyone that I've met has been absolutely phenomenal, very loving, very giving, and on point with what the mission is, which is to come up here to DC. I'm in DC, and make sure that we're holding political figures accountable for what's happening in the realm of sexual assault against service members, veterans, and for me, children as well. And so I'm just so honored to be able to be on here and share a little bit about that. If you all are interested in hearing more or purchasing my book or learning more about my experience, my website is www.Terace Garnier, my name, Terace, Garnier, Garnier.com. And you can get a copy. I have hardback and paperback. And also, one of the things I like to brag about, people always ask me, why don't you sell it on Amazon? No knock on Amazon, but very bad experiences where customers were getting not quality type products. So at least with this book, I put in bookmarks, I put in little cards with affirmations in them, and I hand wrap each and every one of them. So it takes me about 15 minutes per book just to prepare it to ship out because of all the love and the stuff that I put in with it. So you're not just getting a book, you're getting some little, cards that'll give you affirmations you can use throughout the day, some advice on how to set boundaries, how to be at peace. And that's a lot of what my book focuses on too, is helping others overcome that trauma, letting them know they aren't alone, they don't have to suffer in silence, and also providing them information if others that they know of have gone through it, what they should do, what they shouldn't do. And so if you're interested, please definitely check out my website. You can also follow me on Instagram. My Instagram is @Miss, MISS, _T _Garnier. And please, if you do add me on those platforms, feel free to reach out to me. I have people reaching out to me all the time to ask for advice. I have people who say, I have a niece that this happened to. What do I do? Or it happened to me and I want to start kind of diving into that childhood trauma so I can heal from it. So I always encourage people, please feel free to reach out to me. That's what I'm here for. I highly believe that God allowed a lot of the things that happened to me because he knew that I would overcome it, and he knew that I was going to use it to try to help other people. And what better person to help individuals that are going through that than someone who has gone through it and overcame it themselves. As I mentioned earlier, I had started off as an intern at a local TV station in Iwakuni, Japan. So I was a civilian. And then I joined the military as a broadcast journalist, got to travel all over the world covering different stories, got out, became a news correspondent where I also got to travel all around the world doing different stories. One of which I'm actually thinking of, it was a very interesting story, but basically, and I don't know if all y'all remember this because right when it happened, the pandemic also happened as well, but the historic fires in Australia. I got the opportunity to go there and cover that for 2 weeks. So I basically flew to Sydney and traveled all the way up and down the coast, covering different stories about how those fires were impacting local wildlife, the general population, etc. And so that's just one example of a story I got to cover. Some other ones that I got to cover actually as a journalist, civilian journalist, I covered the drawdown, the Afghanistan drawdown. So I was a Pentagon correspondent and I covered a lot of stories that came out of that. So I don't know if you all remember when there was a stabbing, they thought it was a shooting there. I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago. I was the first person on scene to cover that because all the other journalists were inside the Pentagon. I just happened to be pulling up when it happened. So I was literally the only journalist out there live talking about what was happening and what I was seeing and hearing. And so that's another example of being able to cover breaking news. And at this point, I wasn't in the military, so I'm covering the military, which was actually pretty interesting. But I've had a very interesting life. So before we even get into all that, what I did as a civilian, back when I was in the military, I was a broadcast journalist, and I was blessed to be able to be stationed overseas at Yokota, Japan. And so during that time, we had a radio show, which was Eagle 810. And we also had our TV section, which was the Pacific Report. But when I first got there, my aspirations were to do TV. And I remember when I first got there, they introduced me to everyone and they said, congratulations, you're going to be doing radio. And I just remember going, oh, great. And then I remember going home and just crying all day because I was like, I did not want to do radio at all, like not even a little bit. So they ended up making me a radio show host. And only my close family and friends knew this. I absolutely hated it. I hated it so much because I used to joke during my show and say, I'm literally sitting in a padded room with no windows talking to myself for 4 hours. Like anybody would go crazy from that. And so I used to call it the insane asylum because I'm in this padded room talking to myself. But what I ended up doing, and this has always been my mindset, that whenever God gives me something, what am I to learn from this and how can I make the best of it? So during that time, I said, okay, I got to be a radio show host. I don't have a choice. So I can either be, mad about it and everything, or I can accept this and make the best of it. So what I ended up doing was I like to do different accents and different voices. And I was required to do 2 radio commercials a week. I ended up doing 10 a week. And I would bring in different people to act in them and I would do different voices. So I would do my radio show and maybe do it in a British accent. And then, maybe the next day I might do it in a country accent. And then, every day I was switching it. So people thought it was really funny because they're like, we don't know who she's going to be today. And so I made it really fun. And I actually ended up winning a lot of awards for my radio show because I just started having fun with it. I'm like, look, it is what it is. Let's make the best of it. I'm going to love this. And so I did that for a while. And I negotiated with them because my show was so popular. I was DJ Fructis on Eagle 810 and I worked from, I think it was 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. And so I said, okay, look, guys, can we give me a little wiggle room? I'm like far exceeding your expectations when it comes to radio. So can I please do TV too? Because remember, I still want to be on TV. So they said, okay, fine. Yes, you can. You can anchor the evening newscast. Yes. So I was like, thank you, Jesus. And I was so excited. So basically I did radio in the mornings and then I anchored the evening newscast. And then when I wasn't doing those things, I was out shooting different news stories. I shot a couple documentaries. And then I was also, as I mentioned previously, going to school full time, and very, very involved in the community. And it was such a beautiful experience. My only negative about my experience in Japan, which if you get my book, you will find out more. I was assaulted. And at that time, I was involved in the SARC program. And the SARC program puts on different like plays and different commercials, and they'll go to different bases and put on different events where they showcase to different service members what to do if you're assaulted, what you shouldn't say to people, what's acceptable, like catcalling is not acceptable, or saying, oh, you got a big old booty, that's not acceptable, right? So they would give like different examples of things you should and should not do. And if those things do happen, these are the resources that are available to you. So I was very involved with the SARC program. And then unfortunately, I got assaulted. And I did not want to report it because I was very well known throughout all of Pacific Asia. So throughout Japan and Korea and some parts of Europe, people knew me because I was the radio show host. I was in tons of commercials. I was in a movie, Space Brothers. I was in all the magazines. And so for me, for something so traumatic to happen and then basically all of Asia to know about it, that just wasn't something I was all about. I'm like, I want people to know me for my talent, not for something that happened to me. And so it took a chaplain speaking to me and saying, look, it's really important because this could be happening to others, which I did end up finding out later on that this was happening to others. And so that's when after a week, I decided to come forward about it. And I'm not going to say it was an easy process. I did have several people from management or my higher ups that were supporting me, but it was almost, I did face retaliation from my coworkers. I think my list of friends shrank significantly, and I did feel alone a lot of that time. As a matter of fact, it got so bad, they moved me from my dorms into a hotel room, and I had armed security guards outside my room. And I couldn't leave unless they escorted me places, which was really, imagine a 22, 23-year-old, 24-year-old woman not being able to have their freedoms anymore and having to be escorted everywhere. Just wasn't my cup of tea. And so, I tried to make the best of that situation. I reported him. I actually ended up having to leave Japan because he kept threatening me. And they sent me to Joint Base Andrews. And mind you, my unit had no idea I was even coming. I posted on Facebook, hey, I'm going to Joint Base Andrews. And they're like, no, you're not. I'm like, yeah, I am. I'm like, talk to my command. And then my command's like, yeah, she's going to be there tomorrow. So be there at the airport. Now imagine that. I was supposed to be there for another year. And so I ended up coming to Joint Base Andrews, and I started going to counseling, and I got involved where I got this idea. I said, look, I want to create this series where we showcase what's available to sexual assault survivors. And so I kept reaching out to the Pentagon. I'm like, look, we got to do these commercials. I'm telling you, it's going to work. And so they said, okay, great, let's do it. So what I ended up doing was interviewing 3 different survivors. One was a dependent who had been assaulted, and the other 2 were active duty service members. And I created these commercials where they were talking briefly about their experience and what is available to them, to anyone that goes through that kind of trauma. And so as a result, they sent me to the JAG school in Alabama, and I was able to talk to a lot of the attorneys there about the good things that I experienced and things that they can improve on. And then after that, the Pentagon invited me there, and they coined me. So I got coined by a couple generals regarding the different series that I put out to try to help sexual assault survivors. So that was my mission. My last year of my military career, my mission was to help sexual assault survivors. Now, transitioning out of the military into the news sector. Of course, that's still in the back of my mind. I want to raise awareness about that. So I tried to cover a lot of different stories where I was talking about this issue that I do feel is swept under the rug, and it's still being swept under the rug. So I got to cover a lot of different stories, but it wasn't until I had to cover the story of Vanessa Guillen, who was the Fort Hood soldier who was sexually assaulted and then murdered by her coworker, that I realized that it was very important for me to write this book and start raising awareness, especially for us Black and brown women, and not just Black and brown women, Black and brown men as well, because I believe it was Felice Fernando. I believe he was also there at Fort Hood, and they said he died under mysterious circumstances, that he had committed suicide, but he had also reported that he was being sexually assaulted. And so that's when I made it my new mission that I have to speak out against these things, because far too often Black and brown individuals and their concerns are being ignored, and it shouldn't be, and especially when it comes to sexual assault. And so with my book, I definitely focus in on the fact that men and women are being assaulted. I actually have more men that purchase my book than I do women, which is very surprising. But I'm thankful because, like I stated earlier, this happens to men just as much as women. And I feel for men, it's a lot harder for them to try to come forward to seek help because there's a lot more shame built in. They may feel that whatever happened to them took their manhood, or, they're ashamed of it. And so thankfully, I've had a lot of gentlemen reach out to me and share their stories with me and say that this was healing for them. Or I've had other men who've never had that happen to them, but they have children. And they're like, thank you so much for this advice, because I never would have thought I need to protect my 5-year-old son from a family member. And I'm like, yes, you do. And so that's been my main mission for the last couple years, while I've been spending time with family and volunteering with different organizations. My main focus is to raise awareness about this issue and just let people know that you are not alone. This isn't something you caused. This isn't your fault. And you don't need to suffer in silence. And there's a lot of resources available to you, and you can heal from it. And I know at the time when it happened, I thought I was going to die. I really did. I did not think mentally I would be able to handle it, especially when I had to face him in court. But it was so liberating being able to do that and face the man who assaulted me. And yes, he got kicked out of the military. Unfortunately, he didn't have to register as a sex offender, but it is what it is. All that being said, I want to thank America's Heroes Group for having me and letting me share my story. Again, if you guys are interested in getting my book, please head over to www.teracegarnier.com, or you can follow me on Instagram. My handle is @Miss_T, just the letter T, _Garnier. And please feel free, if you have any questions or you have your own experiences you want to share, it's a safe space. Anything you tell me won't go anywhere else. And I just want to be that person that if you need someone to vent to or you need some advice, I can share with you my experience. Now, granted, I'm not a doctor or a counselor, and I will always say go to counseling. But if you want someone that you just need someone to listen to you, that won't judge you, I'm here for you. So again, thank you to America's Heroes Group for having me. Check out my websites, and also check out the Pink Berets as well, because they do this as well. And they have a lot more resources to help get you out of the house and get you doing different events where you can build camaraderie and help you overcome those traumas.